female pedophiles, there's a great deal of controversy about this. In fact, when I brought up the issue that women could sexually abuse children, I was vilified. I was cast out of the sisterhood. I was no longer a good feminist because sexual abuse had to be under the guise of male power. And if I had a significant number of women who were sexually abusing children, and I knew about these women, then that messed up the male power thing. And surely if women were going to abuse children, then they had to be doing it under the thumb of a man. A man had to be telling them to do it. So there are female abusers. They haven't been recognized. They've been able to disguise their abuse, I think, more cleverly than men have. And society doesn't want to believe that there are female abusers. It's easier to think it's a nasty man.
Do women tend to only commit child abuse if there's a man involved as well?
No. In over 75% of the cases, the women acted completely alone. Most times there wasn't even a man in the premises. So, the excuse. And it's interesting about us as women, because we're quite willing to accept that we are a superior breed and that we do everything right, but quite unwilling to accept that we could do anything quite as horrible as this. So it's really not us. We had a conference about this eventually in, I think, 94, maybe earlier. 400 people applied to come to this conference. It was a huge conference. But 30 people, between 20 and 30 people came, dotted themselves in the audience, and tried to disrupt it. They were yelling that, why was I paying attention to women? It wasn't women. I was taking the attention away from men. The irony was we'd given them all free places. That was a mistake. But one of the women who was going to talk about her own abuse, who was now helping others, then couldn't face the audience. So you had this uproar. You had people in the audience turning on these women who were standing up saying, "Sit down, we want to hear about this." And you had them shouting, and it was absolutely strange. And very sad, because it was like, don't tell me this information, even if it's true, because I don't want to hear it. And if those women who came along to our conference had had anything to do about it, nobody else would have ever talked about it. It would have just gone away.
Who were these people that were disruptive?
The people who were disruptive were people who were survivors of male abuse, very, very strong feminists. I've always considered myself a feminist, but boy, they've got me beat all hollow. They are feminists on the extreme, i.e., let's just do away with men and have sperm banks. It was that sort of thing. Many of them, you could not actually tell what gender they were, although I knew that they were women, because they had disguised their own gender. And they were very angry. Very angry.
One argument against even the idea of female paedophiles is that women don't have penises, and so can't really do anything too serious.
Women tend to use objects, broom handles, bottles. One woman said that she was sexually abused by rose stems with the thorns still on, being stuck up. Women can be quite cruel using objects, but they're still after their own sexual gratification. So it's kind of, that it's just a physiological thing, the difference.
Sexual abuse by women has the same foundation as that committed by men. They've generally experienced childhood abuse themselves. Women are not immune from turning into abusers, as we like to think. By pretending that female paedophiles don't exist, we have little protection from them. The link between those that have been abused and then go on to abuse, is that the same whether the victims are male or female?
It does seem to be. The women that I know who have sexually abused children do seem to have been abused in their childhood. I talked to one of them who said, I just want to have sex with kids because sex with children is beautiful. It's non-threatening. It's what happened to me when I was a child. So I think that the link of adult female abusers with abuse in their childhood is the same as a link with adult male abusers. In other words, most of them have been abused. as children in some really dramatic way. I'd written several books about how it was men who sexually abused, and maybe only 5% of abusers ever would be women. And I remember a summer radio time program. In the summer, they're desperate for something to talk about, and everybody's out of town anyway, so this one presenter rang me up and he said, "Come on and talk to me about any cases of female sexual abuse you might have." Well, at that point I only had maybe 10 or 11 or 12, I can't remember. So I went on this program and I talked about women abusing, and it opened up a floodgate. We had tons of telephone calls into the program from adults who thought they were the only ones. And then by the time I got back to my office, we had even more. And it kind of was a snowball effect. It was like when we first started talking about sexual abuse at all, when the adults would say, "I never knew it happened to anybody else. I didn't know that, my dad or my uncle or somebody abused me. I didn't know anybody else did this." Same thing was happening with women. It was men and women ringing, saying, "I was abused by my mother, by my aunt, by a nun, by a teacher, by, all kinds of different people." I was shocked. I don't expect women to sexually abuse. I really, really thought it was a tiny, tiny problem. Yeah, women who sexually abuse children like to have jobs where they're around children. Nursing, teaching, daycare, things like that. You really don't think twice. Most parents don't think twice about leaving their children in care of a woman. They do now think twice about leaving their child in care of a man. Again, I think that that's wrong. But there you are. That's what's happening. So they will find jobs where they can get in contact. It's like an alcoholic in a bar. If you've got an addiction, and this is an addiction, then you will go to some place that you can actually practice your addiction. And any place around kids is a good place.
I know there are plenty of women who commit paedophilia, and they get away with it because of the mother expectation, because of the image that they can use of the motherly type. So a woman can go to a schoolyard quite happily and watch the children go by, but if a man does, there's something perverted going on there, and that's how a lot of older female paedophiles get away with it and continue to get away with it, and they will do, because we're letting them. If we think about women and men in that way, then we're making it easier for them to.
The vast majority of the people who have contacted me have told me that it was their mother who sexually abused them. Now, I wouldn't like to say that that's what's happening necessarily with child sexual abuse everywhere by women. But the mother can disguise what she's doing, putting cream on the child, bathing the child, holding the child in bed. Society thinks, "Ooh, that's okay, because it's a mommy." Maybe it's a bit suspect because it's a dad, which I think is very sad, but that's how it goes. Women who sexually abuse kids, if you look in the media, have affairs with them. They seduce them. The victims, if they're boys, are always described as older than their age. They look bigger. The woman who ran off, I've forgotten her name, she ran off about 2 years ago to Florida with a 14-year-old boy. She was his teacher, I think she was 30-something. This was described as an affair. And my comment was, if that had been a 31-year-old man who'd run off with a 13 or 14-year-old girl, would we have described it as an affair? No, I don't think so. We excuse women. We don't want to believe it. And as Germaine Greer said to me on a television program, well, if it is a woman having sex with a young teenage boy, i.e. a 13 or 14-year-old, and he gets an erection, then clearly it's his responsibility. And I'm going, excuse me? This is not logical. So it seems that the boy, if it's a boy, the boy is blamed in any event. If it's a girl, then it's kind of, she must be a lesbian. It must be something like that. It must be a lesbian affair. no correlation between a boy having an erection and wanting sex, just as there's no correlation with a girl having an orgasm and having sex with an abuser. Children's bodies respond to sexual stimuli. Their minds, their development, their beings are not ready for it. What people do forget is that sexual abuse can feel good if it's not violent and nasty. I mean, you see my kids, when they were tiny, when they were like 7, 8, 9 months old, you go in and you find them with their hands inside their nappies asleep at night. The same with girls. So there's a sexuality that children have. But when that is hothoused, when it's forced, when the development is at the behest of the abuser and not at the natural developmental level of the child, then that's abuse. When you talk to these boys who have these affairs, and I put that in quotes because it's abuse, with older women, at the time of the affair, they're usually confused. They've usually been told having sex is a good thing. And other people would say, oh, you lucky boy. You know, oh, you've had sex with an older woman. Boy, I wish I was that. When you talk to them 10 years later, and they look back on it, one man said to me, in fact, he's in the book, I did a program with him, and he said, I should have been out kicking footballs with my friends. I should have been dating girls. I should have been concentrating on my schoolwork. He said, and all I could think about was the next time I was going to have sex with my teacher.
Most child abuse is committed by single or unmarried women. A child's health prospects dramatically deteriorate when there's no father in the household.
What I have found is that the vast majority were women alone. If they did have partners or husbands, the partners were either away a lot or were quite weak. According to the people who contacted me, it would quite often just be them and the mother in the home. And for the little boys, when they were little boys, they were almost used as if they were the husband. And the little girls were abused as well. So, in families where there is one parent, usually the mother, and a whole series of men coming in and out of the family, there are, lovers and uncles and all sorts of people coming in and out, that in that kind of a chaotic, call it a chaotic family home, that sexual abuse is 40% more likely to happen. Now that's from a man called David Finkelhor, who's done long-term study on sexual abuse. That doesn't mean necessarily that any of those men coming into the house are the abusers. What it seems to indicate is that the child is not safe and secure and could be open to, being seduced and abused by other people. It doesn't mean that single parent families are bad. It's just that I cannot disguise the fact that the vast majority of this abuse has happened where there has only been, when it's been mother abuse, when there's only been a mother in the home. I think most female sexual abuse goes undetected, and in fact I think that a lot of people cover up for their mothers.
It comes down to perception. For instance, men are the sexual predators and women are not, which means that women can get away with child abuse a lot easier than men can, and they do.
It's very rarely talked about. There are only 2 or 3 books even out there about the subject.
Women, you don't imagine a woman using her power over children in the same way that you would imagine a man could.
I think society wants to believe, particularly in relation to mothers and children and to that relationship, that that's a sacred relationship. And I'd like to believe that. I must tell you that as a mother myself, I find the idea of women sexually abusing children more abhorrent than just about anything I can think of. Because most mothers, and indeed fathers, would kill to protect their children. They would do anything to protect their children. And the fact that that has been portrayed makes it more difficult for society to acknowledge it. Because if you acknowledge it, where do you go from there? Do you start warning children about everybody? Do you start saying, we're not sure mothers are safe? Because remember, the vast majority of parents do love their kids and would never abuse them. But it's very dicey. Women have been idealized for a long time too. They're perfect mothers. Don't we wish we were? Divorce cases, custody cases, we're seeing more and more and more of that, where the woman wanting to get full custody of the child is suddenly, out of the blue, making allegations that the father has abused the child and is coaching the child to say the same. When you talk to the child, however, and they cannot describe the sounds, the tastes, the smells, and all of that, you can start to know that they've been coached, because they're just parroting words. But it's so destructive, both to the child. I have no patience at all with parents who use that, with the mothers who use that as an allegation against fathers to keep them from their children. I think that is wicked.
Does it only tend to be that one way?
It does tend to be, yes. We have. I don't know of any cases, there may be some, where the father is alleged abuse by the mother to get custody of the child. I'm actually very distressed by what has happened about sexual abuse of children in general. And my main distress is the kind of vilification of men. There was a study which came out from one of the polytechs that became a university. And the study said that most men could become sexual abusers. And I spoke out against that on the media very, very strongly, because I was furious. I'm raising 2 sons. What is the message to young men? That you're a danger to your own children?
What can be done to address that? I mean,
we have to speak out. And it's not a popular thing to do, but whenever anybody makes one of these absolutely ludicrous statements, it's very important that people stand up and say, excuse me, prove that. What is this? Like this university saying that all men have the potential to be abusers. That's like saying we all have the potential to be murderers. I mean, I suppose we all have the potential to be all kinds of things. Edicts are coming out from councils telling teachers not to touch children between the shoulders and the knees, not to let them sit on your lap if you're reading them a story. And this is, although it says it's aimed at men and women, it's aimed at men. The same brush has been used to paint all men. Watch out for men. It's a bad message for men, it's a bad message for kids, and it's an untrue message, and it's statistically not sound.
British Airways will not allow an unaccompanied child to sit next to an adult male passenger. And I was just wondering, from the perspective of your role here at Kidscape, do you have an opinion on that?
I think that is pathetic. Really pathetic. That is buying into the culture that all men are potential abusers. I think that is such an insult. I bet if that were taken to the European Court of Human Rights, that would be thrown out immediately. What are they thinking? That, they've got a pedophile on every flight and he might want to sexually abuse a child? Very sad. And what if they sit the child next to a woman and she turns out to be an abuser? I think it's wrong-headed.